Chapter 1. The Perfect Match. My name is Grace. I am 24 years old and I live in Boston with my parents. I always dreamed of a beautiful marriage. I thought love would come softly like music that never hurts, but life doesn't always follow what we imagine. My parents loved me deeply. We were not rich, but our home was full of peace. My father always said, "Grace, you deserve a man who will protect you." I smiled whenever he said that. I never knew that the same love would lead me into pain. One evening my father came home early. He looked excited and said, "Grace, I have good news. My old friend has a son named Daniel. He's a good man. He has a stable job and his family is respectable. They want to meet you." I froze. My heart started beating fast. I whispered, "But Dad, I don't even know him." He smiled and said, "You will. It's the perfect match." My mother hugged me and said, "We just want you to be safe, Grace. Daniel will take care of you." I wanted to believe her, but something inside me felt uneasy. Still, I didn't argue. In my family, saying no was never easy. A few days later, Daniel's parents came to our home. They looked polite and confident. His mother said, "Your daughter is pure and kind. She will bring peace to our home." My parents smiled proudly. I sat quietly beside them, my hands shaking under the table. After they left, my mother said, "Everything went so well." My father nodded. "Daniel's family liked you. They will call soon." I forced a smile, but my eyes felt heavy. That night I sat alone in my room. I whispered to myself, "Why am I scared of someone I've never met?" The next morning my father told me that the wedding date was fixed. "It will be a simple ceremony," he said. "Everything is settled." My spoon fell from my hand. "So soon?" I asked softly. He looked serious. Good matches should not be delayed. Days passed in a blur. Relatives started visiting. Everyone congratulated me. They said, "Grace, you are lucky. Daniel is a gentleman." I smiled at them, but inside I was trembling. No one asked me what I wanted. No one asked, "Are you ready?" My friend Emily came to see me one evening. She whispered, "Grace, do you love him?" I looked away and said, "I don't know him, Emily." She held my hand and said, "Then tell your parents." I shook my head. "It's too late. They are happy. I can't break their hearts." Days turned into weeks. I tried to prepare myself. I prayed every night. I told myself that maybe love would come after marriage. Maybe Daniel was a kind man. Maybe my parents were right. The wedding day arrived. I wore a white dress that my mother had saved money for. Everyone said I looked beautiful. My father looked proud and my mother cried softly, hiding her tears behind her veil. When I reached the church, Daniel was standing near the altar. He looked handsome, but there was something cold in his eyes. He smiled politely when he saw me. My hands felt cold, but I smiled back. The priest spoke about love, loyalty, and trust. I tried to listen, but my heart felt heavy. When Daniel placed the ring on my finger, I looked into his eyes and tried to find kindness. I could not find it. He avoided my gaze. I told myself, maybe he is just shy. After the ceremony, everyone clapped. My relatives said, "What a perfect couple." I smiled for photos, but I felt like an actor in someone else's story. That night when all the guests left, I stood by the window and looked at the moon. My heart whispered, "Please let this be love. Please let him care for me." My mother hugged me before leaving and said, "You are married now, Grace. Make your husband happy." I nodded. Her voice was shaking and mine was gone. As I entered the new house, I could hear my heart beating loudly. Daniel greeted his friends at the door. They laughed, they drank, and I stood quietly waiting for the moment he would finally look at me like a husband looks at his wife, but he didn't. Not even once. When the guests finally left, Daniel said coldly, "You can go to the room. I'll be there soon." His voice had no warmth. I nodded and went inside. I sat on the bed still wearing my wedding dress. My hands were cold. I looked at the ring and whispered, "Is this what happiness looks like?" Minutes felt like hours. I kept waiting for him. My heart kept saying, "It will be fine." But somewhere deep inside I felt a quiet fear growing. That night was the beginning of something I could not stop. It was the start of a story I never wanted to live. Chapter 2. The wedding night. The house became silent after everyone left. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her white dress. Her hands were shaking. She whispered to herself, "Everything will be fine. It's my first night as a wife." The door opened. Daniel walked in slowly. His eyes looked tired, not gentle. He said, "You look beautiful." Grace smiled a little. "Thank you," she whispered. He came closer. The smile on his face was small, but strange. Grace's heart beat fast. She tried to speak, but her voice got lost. For a few seconds there was silence. Then Daniel touched her shoulder. It did not feel like love. It felt heavy and cold. Grace looked at him and said softly, "Please talk to me first." He didn't answer. He pulled her close. She felt trapped. She said again, "Daniel, please. I'm nervous." But he did not listen. His touch became rough. She froze. Her eyes filled with tears. He didn't notice. He didn't even look at her face. Grace tried to move away. "Stop, please," she cried. He whispered, "Just stay quiet." That night her dream broke. The man who was supposed to love her made her feel like nothing. She stopped fighting. Her heart went empty. When it was over, Daniel walked to the window and said coldly, "You are not pure." Grace turned to him, shocked. "What did you say?" He looked at her with anger. "Don't act innocent. You have been with someone before. Tell me the truth." Grace shook her head again and again. "Never. I swear I haven't." Her voice cracked. He shouted, "Liar." Grace started crying loudly. "Why are you saying this to me? What did I do?" Daniel turned away. "You fooled everyone. You fooled me too." His words cut her deeper than anything. Minutes passed, but no one spoke. Grace tried to reach him. "Daniel, look at me. Please believe me," he said without turning. "Pack your things in the morning. Go back to your house. Don't tell anyone about this night." She stood there frozen. "You're sending me away?" she asked in disbelief. He didn't answer. He left the room. The door closed. Grace fell on the floor. She cried until she could not breathe. "Why me?" she whispered. Her wedding dress was still shining, but she felt dirty inside. She held her chest and said, "God, I did nothing wrong. Why am I punished?" That night felt endless. Every minute hurt. She remembered her father's proud face, her mother's tears of joy. How would she face them now? She looked at her ring and said, "You were supposed to mean love." When the morning came, the sky was pale. Grace packed her bag quietly. Daniel didn't come to see her. His mother knocked on the door and said softly, "Your cab is waiting." She looked away, maybe ashamed. Grace walked out with trembling steps. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. The sound of her footsteps was louder than her heartbeat. She sat in the car and whispered, "My wedding night is over, but my pain has just begun." On the way home, her mind replayed every word he said. "You're not pure. Go back home." She covered her ears, trying not to hear them again. Her eyes burned, but she didn't wipe the tears. When she reached her parents' door, her mother ran toward her. "Grace, what happened?" Grace tried to speak but couldn't. Her father stood in silence. His eyes were full of questions. She hugged her mother tightly and cried, "I'm sorry, Mom." Her mother held her face. Why are you saying sorry? Grace shook her head. Because I broke your trust. Because I came back. Her mother whispered. You did nothing wrong, my child. But Grace couldn't believe it yet. That night, she sat alone in her old room. Her wedding ring lay on the table. She looked at it and said, You didn't stay even one day. She wanted to scream, but only a whisper came out. She promised herself one thing. I will never forget this pain. But one day I will stand again. Chapter 3. The Return Home. Grace sat on the edge of her old bed, still wearing the same dress from her wedding night. Her mother sat beside her, crying silently. Her father stood by the door, unable to say a word. The air felt heavy with questions that no one dared to ask. Her mother touched her hand softly. Grace, what happened? She asked again. Grace tried to speak, but no words came out. Her throat felt tight. Her father said, in a low voice, Did he hurt you? Grace looked down and whispered, He told me to leave. Her mother gasped, Leave, but why? Grace shook her head slowly. He said, I am not pure. Her voice broke. Her father clenched his fist. That's a lie, he said firmly. I raised you better than anyone. Grace cried. I don't know why he said that. I didn't do anything wrong. Her mother hugged her tightly. My poor child, she whispered. You don't deserve this pain. Grace buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Mom, I thought marriage meant love, but it felt like punishment. For hours no one spoke. Her parents sat with her in silence. That night Grace couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes she heard Daniel's voice. You are not pure. She kept whispering. I am. I swear I am. Days passed slowly. People in the neighborhood started asking questions. One woman said to Grace's mother, Your daughter came back so soon. Is everything all right? Another said quietly, Maybe there was a secret. Her mother tried to stay calm, but every word hurt her. One afternoon Grace heard two neighbors whispering outside the gate. Daniel left her. Must be her fault, one said. Yes, maybe she cheated, the other replied. Grace stood behind the door, her eyes filled with tears. She said to herself, They don't even know me. Her father came home that evening tired and angry. I went to his house, he said. Daniel's parents refused to talk. They said you were not honest. Grace held her head. Dad, please. Believe me. He hugged her. I do, Grace, but I feel helpless. Her mother placed food on the table. Grace pushed the plate away. I can't eat, her mother said softly. You have to stay strong. Grace replied, How, Mom? Everyone thinks I'm dirty. Her mother looked into her eyes and said, Truth will stay clean even when people throw mud on it. Days turned into weeks. Grace stopped meeting people. She stayed inside her room most of the time. She cried quietly. Every night, her eyes became dull. Sometimes her mother would sit by her bed and whisper, God sees everything. Grace only nodded. One morning a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. Grace opened it with shaking hands. It said, Don't contact me again. Forget what happened. Move on. Her hands trembled. She ripped the letter into pieces. He doesn't even feel sorry, she whispered. Her father saw her crying and said, We will not talk about him again. But Grace couldn't stop. Every word he had said still lived in her mind. She wished she could erase it. One evening her childhood friend Emily came to visit. She hugged Grace tightly and said, I heard everything. Tell me. It's not true. Grace cried. I didn't lie, Emily. I swear I didn't. Emily wiped her tears. You don't have to explain. I know your heart. Grace looked at her and said, Then why doesn't anyone else? Emily held her hands. Because the world loves gossip more than truth. Grace smiled weakly. You sound like my mother. Emily laughed softly. Maybe your mother is right. Emily tried to take Grace outside, but she refused. I can't face people, Grace said. They all look at me like I'm guilty. Emily replied. You can't hide forever. That night, Grace sat near her window, staring at the streetlights. She said softly, I lost everything. My name, my respect, my dreams. Then she whispered, but maybe I still have my truth. The next morning, her mother entered the room with folded hands. Grace, she said, your father wants you to live again. You can't die every day for what someone else did. Grace looked at her mother and said, I'll try, Mom. I don't know how, but I'll try. A few days later, her father told her about a small job opening. It's in a local office, he said. You'll answer calls and file papers. Grace hesitated. Dad, what if they ask about my past? He smiled sadly. Then tell them you survived it. Her mother said. Maybe work will help you heal. Grace nodded slowly. I'll go. That night before sleeping, she looked at the ceiling and said, God, please give me one reason to start again. And maybe that was the first moment when something inside her began to change. Her pain was still there, but she was tired of crying. She wanted to stand even if her legs shook. She wanted to live even if her heart still hurt. Grace whispered softly, tomorrow I'll take my first step. Chapter 4. The World Against Me. The next morning, Grace woke up early. Her heart was still heavy, but she was tired of crying. She looked in the mirror and said softly, you have to try. She got ready and went to her first day of work. The office was small, but the people seemed polite. Her boss, Mr. Harris, said, welcome, Grace. You'll manage phone calls and files. She nodded. Her hands were cold, but she smiled. It was her first smile in weeks. During lunch, she sat alone. Two women whispered near the door. That's the girl who came back after marriage, one said. Yes, I heard she cheated. The other replied. Grace heard everything, but she didn't react. She just looked down and whispered, let them talk. When she came home, her mother asked gently, how was it? Grace said, hard, but I'll go again tomorrow. Her mother smiled. That's my brave girl. Every day was a struggle. Some people in the office treated her kindly, but some looked at her with judgment. Grace kept silent. She worked with focus, and slowly her boss started to notice. One evening he said, you work hard, Grace. Don't care what others say. His words felt like a small light in her dark days. But outside, people were still cruel. Some relatives stopped visiting. Some neighbors pretended not to see her. One day, an old friend avoided her on the street. Grace felt her heart break again. I didn't do anything wrong, she said under her breath. Why do they hate me? Her father tried to protect her. Ignore them, Grace, he said. People forget the truth when they enjoy lies. Grace nodded, but deep down she was tired. She said to her mother one night, it's strange. One lie from him and the world turned against me. Her mother hugged her and said, the world will change one day. Till then, stay kind. A few weeks later, Grace got her first salary. It was a small amount, but she held it proudly. She said, Mom, this is mine. Her mother smiled with tears in her eyes. You made me proud again. Grace replied, I just wanted to feel useful. Still, the whispers didn't stop. One evening, a relative called her mother and said, your daughter is working now. What kind of girl goes out alone after her husband leaves? Grace overheard it. She took the phone and said calmly, a girl who wants to live. The woman went silent. Grace ended the call. Her mother stared at her surprised. Grace said, I'm done staying quiet. From that day, she changed a little. She didn't argue with people, but she didn't cry anymore. When someone looked at her with doubt, she looked back with strength. Her mother said, "You look different, Grace." She smiled softly. Maybe pain is teaching me who I am. One night, Grace sat with her father and said, "Dad, I don't hate Daniel. I just wish he had trusted me once." Her father said quietly, "Some men don't deserve trust, Grace. But I'm proud of the woman you are becoming." She smiled and said, "I'll make you purder." One afternoon while leaving work she saw Daniel's mother at the corner of the street. The older woman looked at her and quickly turned away. Grace stopped and said, "Mrs. Miller, please wait." The woman froze. Grace walked closer and said, "I don't hate you. I hope your son finds peace." Tears came to the woman's eyes. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Grace." Grace said softly, "I forgive you." When she came home that evening, her heart felt lighter. Her mother asked, "Why are you smiling?" Grace said, "Because I forgave someone who never said sorry." Her mother touched her face and whispered, "That's strength, not weakness." Grace started spending her evenings writing in a small notebook. She wrote about her pain, her fears, and her small victories. She wrote lines like, "They took my name but not my soul." She didn't know yet, but those words would later become the reason many other women would find hope one day. Emily visited again. She looked at Grace and said, "You seem peaceful." Grace smiled. "I still hurt, but I'm learning to breathe again." Emily hugged her and whispered, "You're stronger than before." Grace looked out the window and said, quietly, "The world still talks about me, but now I don't care because I know my truth." Her father walked in and said proudly, "Our daughter is standing again." Her mother smiled, "And this time she won't fall." Grace took a deep breath and whispered, "Maybe this pain is not my ending. Maybe it's my beginning." Like, subscribe, and share. Read this story and many more on our website bookiesenglish.com. Link in the description. Chapter 5. The Day I Let Go. Weeks passed. Grace worked every day and came home quietly each night. Her body was tired, but her mind was learning peace. She had stopped asking why. She now whispered, "Maybe I'll never know. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore." One evening she saw Daniel at a cafe near her office. He was with another woman dressed in gold jewelry and rich clothes. For a second Grace's heart stopped. Memories rushed back like wind. She wanted to walk away, but Daniel noticed her. He stood up and said softly, "Grace." She turned slowly. "Yes," she said calmly. He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "I hurt you. I thought money meant happiness, but I was wrong." Grace listened without blinking. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked quietly. Daniel sighed. "Because the woman I chose doesn't love me. She only loves what I can buy. You loved me without reason, and I threw that away." Grace looked at him with steady eyes. "You broke me, Daniel. You called me names I never deserved. You destroyed my peace," he said in a small voice. "I know. I live with that guilt every day." Grace took a deep breath. "Then live with it." "I forgive you, but not for you. I forgive you for me." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She answered softly, "Because I don't want to carry your darkness anymore." He looked stunned. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Grace smiled sadly. "No. Hating you means keeping you in my heart. I've already let you go." She turned to leave. Daniel whispered, "Grace, wait." She stopped for a moment, but didn't look back. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said and walked away. Outside she took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were light, not heavy. She whispered, "I'm free now." That night she told her mother about the meeting. Her mother listened quietly and said, "You did the right thing. Forgiving someone who never asked for it takes strength." Grace nodded. "It doesn't erase the Pain, but it ends the story. Her father smiled softly. You let him go with dignity. That's rare. Grace looked at him and said, he no longer controls my peace. From that day, something changed in her. She smiled more. She started sleeping without nightmares. She stopped checking her phone, expecting messages. She deleted his number and whispered, you're not part of me anymore. At work, people noticed her calmness. Her boss said, you seem lighter these days. Grace replied, maybe peace looks like this. Emily visited again. She asked, you finally look happy. What happened? Grace said, I forgave the wrong person, and somehow that healed the right one. Me. Emily hugged her and said, that's what strength looks like. A week later, Grace was leaving work when she saw a young woman crying outside the building. She went closer and asked, are you okay? The girl said, my fiancé broke off our wedding. He said I'm not good enough. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. Listen to me, she said softly. You are enough. Don't let one person decide your worth. The girl wiped her tears. How do you know? Grace smiled gently. Because I lived it. The girl hugged her tightly. That hug made Grace realize something. Her pain had become someone else's hope. That night she opened her notebook again and wrote, today I met a girl who reminded me of myself. I told her, she will be fine. Maybe that was the message I needed to hear too. Days turned into weeks. Life began to feel new. Grace still remembered her past, but it didn't hurt anymore. She said to her mother one evening, I think I'm ready to dream again. Her mother asked, what dream? Grace smiled softly. The dream of loving without fear. Her father said, whoever gets your heart next will be blessed. Grace replied, I just want someone who sees me as I am. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and whispered, you made it through. She touched her heart and said, you let go and you survived. The pain had not disappeared. It had turned into power. Grace closed her diary and smiled for the first time without tears. She whispered, the worst night of my life gave me the strength to find myself. Join our membership for exclusive English stories on bookishenglish.com. Link in the description. Chapter 6. The Stranger Who Cared. After that day at the cafe, Grace began to feel lighter. She went to work, came home and smiled again. But something inside her whispered, there's more you can do. One afternoon, her boss told her about a community shelter that helped women in pain. He said, they need volunteers for teaching and support. Grace thought for a moment and replied, I'll go. Her mother smiled when she heard, maybe helping others will heal you too. She said softly. The first day at the shelter changed everything. Grace listened to stories of women who had been broken and still stood strong. She saw herself in them. One of the coordinators introduced her to a man named Ethan. He said, this is Grace. She'll help with writing sessions. Ethan smiled kindly. Nice to meet you, he said. His voice was calm. Grace nodded shyly. They started seeing each other often. Ethan came every week to teach computer skills. He always greeted everyone with warmth. Grace noticed he never judged anyone, never asked unnecessary questions. One evening, he saw her comforting a crying woman and said, you're good at this. Grace smiled softly. Maybe because I know how it feels. Ethan nodded, his eyes gentle. Days turned into weeks. Grace and Ethan began to talk more. He told her about losing his sister in an accident. That's why I help here, he said. It makes me feel close to her. Grace said quietly, pain teaches us to be kind. He looked at her and replied, yes, it also teaches us to listen. They started sharing coffee after the sessions. The first time, Grace said, I haven't laughed like this in years. Ethan smiled. Then let's make it a habit. She laughed again, and for a moment she forgot her past. Her mother noticed the change. "You're glowing again," she said. Grace replied, "It's strange, Mom. I'm not in love, but I feel peace near him." Her mother whispered, "Maybe peace is love in another form." One day it rained heavily. Grace slipped outside the shelter and Ethan caught her hand. They both laughed. He said softly, "Careful, Grace." She smiled and said, "I keep falling, don't I?" Ethan looked at her and replied, "Yes, but you always stand again." That night Grace sat on her bed, thinking of his words. "You always stand again," she whispered. "Maybe he's right." She felt something warm in her heart. Not like before, not heavy, just light. The next week Ethan found her sitting alone after class. He said, "You look tired." She smiled. "Just thinking too much." He asked, "About what?" She looked at him and said, "About how some people enter our lives to remind us what kindness feels like." Ethan stayed quiet, then said, "And some people stay to make sure you never forget it again." Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't reply. They just sat together in silence. And for the first time in years, silence felt safe. Over time their friendship became special. He never asked about her past, and she never needed to hide it. He respected her space, her pace, her fears. One evening Grace said to him, "You know, I thought love meant pain, but now I think love means peace." Ethan smiled. "Then you finally understand it." She nodded and whispered, "Maybe." When she came home, her father asked, "How's work at the shelter?" Grace said, "It feels like a new chapter, Dad." Her mother smiled. "And maybe there's a new person in that chapter." Grace laughed softly. "Maybe, Mom." That night she wrote in her diary, "Today I met someone who didn't promise love but showed care. Maybe this is how real healing begins." She closed the book and looked up. "Thank you, God," she whispered. "You didn't forget me." Grace didn't know what future waited for her, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of it. She had let go of her past, and now life was gently teaching her to trust again. Send us a super thanks if this story touched your heart. It really helps us keep going. Chapter 7. When love returned. Weeks passed, and Grace's days at the shelter became the best part of her life. She looked forward to seeing Ethan every week. His quiet care had slowly built a new space in her heart. It wasn't rushed. It was calm, like breathing after a long cry. One afternoon Grace said to him, "You always help others, but who helps you?" Ethan smiled gently. "People like you," he said. She laughed softly. "I don't do much." He looked at her and said, "You listen. That's more than enough." Her heart trembled at those words. She hadn't felt that warmth for a long time. Later that night she told her mother, "He's kind, Mom. He never asks about my past." Her mother smiled. "Good men don't ask. They understand." The next few weeks Ethan and Grace spent more time together. They had coffee after work. They talked about books, songs, and small dreams. One day Grace said, "You know, I used to hate the sound of my name. It reminded me of everything I lost." Ethan looked at her and said softly, "Then let me give it a new meaning." Grace felt her eyes fill with tears. She whispered, "You make it sound beautiful again." One evening it started raining. Ethan offered her his jacket, but she refused. "I can handle it," she said with a smile. He looked at her and said, "You've been handling too much alone. Let someone stand with you now." Something inside her broke in a good way. She felt her guard fall slowly. "Why are you always so kind to me?" she asked. He replied, "Because I see strength where others saw pain." Grace couldn't speak. She just looked at him and said softly, "You make me believe again." Days turned into months. Their bond became deeper. Ethan respected her silence and celebrated her laughter. He never rushed her heart. He only walked beside her step by step. One Sunday they went to a small park near the shelter. Grace said, "It feels strange to smile this much." Ethan laughed. "That's what healing looks like." She smiled back. "Maybe love looks like this too." He looked at her quietly. Then he said, "Grace, I know you've been hurt. I won't promise to erase your pain, but I can promise not to cause it again." She felt her heart melt. "Ethan," she said softly, "you already healed half of it." He smiled and reached into his pocket. There was a small silver ring. "This isn't about forgetting your past," he said. "It's about walking into your future." Grace froze. Her hands shook. "Ethan, I don't know if I'm ready," he said gently. "Then I'll wait. I'm not here to rush love. I'm here to build it." She looked into his eyes and whispered, "You're the first person who ever said that." Ethan replied, "Maybe I'm the first person who truly saw you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She nodded slowly. "Then yes," she whispered. "Let's start our future one peaceful day at a time." Ethan smiled. He didn't hug her. He just held her hand gently and said, "You're safe now." That night, Grace came home and told her parents. Her mother cried with joy. Her father said proudly, "You deserve happiness, Grace. You waited long enough." Grace hugged them both and whispered, "This time it feels real." In her diary she wrote, "Today love returned not like fire but like sunlight." She closed the book and whispered, "Thank you, God, for sending him when I stopped asking." For the first time, love didn't hurt. It healed. Chapter 8. The Morning That Healed Me. Grace woke up one quiet morning and felt something new inside her. The fear that once lived in her heart was gone. She stood before the mirror and smiled softly. "You made it," she whispered. There were no tears now, only calm. The pain that had once ruled her life had slowly turned into strength. She finally understood that peace is not found in forgetting the past but in forgiving. A few months later, she and Ethan were married in a small garden behind her parents' home. There were no crowds, no decorations, only love. Her father held her hand and said, "This time you are walking toward peace." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. Ethan looked at her the way every woman dreams to be seen, with respect and care. When he said, "You're safe with me," she believed him. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment near the sea. Every morning Ethan made coffee and said, "Good morning, my brave wife." Grace laughed softly and replied, "I'm still learning to be brave." He would smile and answer, "You already are." Those simple words healed her more than anything else ever had. Grace kept working at the women's shelter. Many women came there with broken hearts. They told her stories of pain and betrayal. She listened with patience and hope. One woman said, "My husband left me. I don't know how to live again." Grace held her hand gently and said, "You will. I was once where you are. If I can rise, you can too." That moment made Grace realize that her story now had a purpose. Her pain had become medicine for others. One evening, Grace's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was Daniel. His text said, "I saw your story online. I'm happy for you. I'm sorry for everything." Grace looked at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, "Thank you. I hope you find peace too." When she pressed send, she smiled. The past no longer had power over her. That night she told Ethan, "I finally said goodbye." He touched her hand and said, "And did it hurt?" Grace smiled. No, it felt like closing a door gently, instead of slamming it. Months turned into a year. Grace's book came out. The Night That Broke Me, The Morning That Healed Me. It told her story from heartbreak to healing. Messages poured in from people across the country. Women wrote, "You gave me hope." Men said, "You made me understand how fragile a woman's heart is." Grace read every message with tears of gratitude. She whispered, "If my pain helped even one soul, it was worth it." One afternoon she was invited to speak at a women's event. Standing on the stage, her hands shook but her voice was steady. "A few years ago," she said, "I thought my life was over. But I learned that pain doesn't end you, it changes you. Never let anyone decide your worth." The crowd stayed silent for a moment. Then everyone stood and clapped. Grace bowed her head and smiled. She felt free. Outside the hall, a young girl waited nervously. "Miss Grace," she said, "I was going to end my life, but after hearing you, I want to try again." Grace hugged her tightly and whispered, "Promise me you'll never give up." The girl nodded through tears. Grace smiled and said, "That promise is all I ever wanted." That night when she came home, Ethan had made dinner. "How was the event?" he asked. "It was beautiful," she said. I think I made someone believe again." Ethan smiled. "You always do." They ate together, laughing softly between bites. Grace said, "You know, I don't need a big life. I just want peace." Ethan replied, "And love that feels like home." She nodded. "Yes, love that feels like home." Years later, Grace often sat beside her aging parents. Her mother said, "I was wrong to rush you into marriage before." Grace held her hand gently. "Don't say that, Mom. That pain led me here. Without it, I would never have met Ethan, and I would never have known my own strength." Her father smiled proudly. "You forgave everyone, Grace. That's why your heart shines so bright." She laughed softly and said, "Forgiveness is the only kind of revenge that brings peace." One evening she looked at Ethan and said, "You came when my life was broken." Ethan shook his head. "No, Grace, you rebuilt it yourself. I only reminded you that you could." She felt tears in her eyes again, not of sadness but of gratitude. Later that night she couldn't sleep. She sat near the window and thought about everything. The wedding that broke her, the nights she cried, the mornings she tried to breathe, the day she forgave, and the moment love returned. She whispered to the sky, "I'm not angry anymore." For the first time in years her heart felt light. When morning came, sunlight touched her face. Ethan opened his eyes and said, "Good morning, sunshine." Grace smiled and whispered, "Good morning, healing." She looked into the mirror once more and said quietly, "I'm proud of you." The girl who once cried in silence had become a woman who helped others find their voice. The woman who once begged for love now lived with dignity and peace. She had lost everything once, but she had gained more: kindness, strength, and true love. The night had broken her, but the morning had healed her completely. Join our membership for exclusive English stories on bookishenglish.com. Link in the description. The end.